Ever wonder why your best script keeps getting ignored even when everyone you ask tells you it's great? After 13 years as a script editor and professional story producer, I keep seeing the same 5 silent killers sink really strong work. So here they are with examples of client work and fixes you can implement right now. Writing a script is a lot like sweating blood in a dark room alone. It's messy, mad, and emotionally draining, and leaves you wondering if you've got an extraordinary power no one can know about. By the time you've finished your draft, you know your character's secrets, but because you wrote it, you're also filling in the blanks in your mind that the reader can't see. If you've packed in twists, set pieces, and clever turns, but those don't meaningfully impact a character we care about, because you're assuming that what's clear to you will be clear to us, clever scripts quickly feel technically impressive, but instantly forgettable. So reason number 1 is, whose story actually is this? And why am I going to care? A few months ago, I gave notes for a major international streamer. It was slick, cinematic, and gripping, and while the pace was unrelenting, so many characters were introduced so fast and constantly hopped between that I admired that plotting, but felt ultimately zero investment because I never stayed with anyone long enough to get to know them and actually care. Events alone aren't story. Emotional investment, development, and emotional pressure are also key. So the quick solution is to try and anchor every scene to a character's emotional development or internal conflict in some way, so that they're not just plot beats. Ask, how and who does this change or test the most? What does progressing cost this person inside? What decision are they forced to make now, and what new consequences can that decision create? Another example is a sci-fi pilot that I consulted on recently for a private client. They'd delayed the protagonist's personal crisis until page 40, while her brother dominated Act 2, and that confused the storyline about what was important for what I was supposed to understand this show was actually about. There was lots of urgency and energy on an emotional level, which was great, but because it wasn't about her crisis, the trigger for this show that the first act had actually set up, I didn't know why this stuff I'm watching in Act 2 matters, because I can't see how it plugs in to the thing I think I've signed up to now see. So you need to pick your tour guide and put them front and center, and then just widen the lens once we care about who's important. Ultimately, the lead should be opening the door to your episode and story world, at which point the others can step through. As a writer, remember that you're ultimately inviting viewers into a particular story experience. So if you throw everyone at them all at once, you're often going to overwhelm them. If you introduce that whole ensemble before we've bonded with who you think is the lead, the readers are often not intrigued, they're just mentally lost about what really matters. So trim early point of view sprawls until our investment is secured on the character you know your story should ultimately revolve around. In most hour-long episodes, the big "this story has actually started" moment is usually going to land between pages 12 to 15, because also that's where ad breaks tend to land. So if you're at page 25 and we still don't know what this story's about, that's a problem. So therefore, hold off secondary arcs until we're locked in to the main journey. And remember that your plot will give us a roller coaster, but emotional investment is why we're getting on the ride. Reason number 2 is that your character wants something, but nothing urgent is compelling their actions now. Characters acting on a justifiable desire, but without any urgency, flatlines dramatic writing. Drama is decisions, but if nothing says they have to act now and we understand why, the story is going to feel boring or at best contrived. An example of this showing up is in a period drama script by a writing duo I helped recently, which was a social realism piece in which the characters wanted better lives, but there was no do or die pressure, so it felt whimsical, and the dialogue claimed a crisis was happening, but that didn't match the energy because the father, while jobless, was given a rosy point of view and a mantra that it would all work out, which was really nice characterization, but totally undercut the ability to have a sense of any real stakes. When I suggested making a closing deadline for rental payments by a cruel landlord, suddenly the entire script came to life. It just needed a ticking clock. Conflict is often talked about, but that doesn't mean it has to be violent conflict. Really, that just means something must be encountered, trialed with, and overcome. And with stakes, it's important to remember that if it doesn't all feel like life or death to your characters, then it definitely won't to us. So make sure you're translating vague character wants into specific jeopardy. X must happen by Y, or Z is lost. I want a better life becomes I need £3,000 by Friday, or I'm homeless. That's when scenes will start writing themselves. So break equilibrium, add a ticking clock, and make every scene either advance or block a goal, so they have to find a workaround. Desire alone isn't your rocket fuel, but urgency and personal stakes quickly will be. Reason number 3 is that your concept itself is doing the dramatic work that your character should be doing themselves. This is one for genre writers because a high concept idea can often attract the most attention, but only character depth and character development will really sustain that engagement. When the idea carries the most dramatic weight, the experience ultimately comes to feel hollow. In notes I recently gave for a horror adaptation of a famous IP, the lore is super compelling and the script was really well written, but because the story is also well known, it meant that the protagonist quickly became a delivery system for expected plot beats. Her motivations weren't really personal or urgent, and so those characterful choices quickly felt contrived. If your protagonist could be swapped for any other person and the plot barely changes, then the concept is really doing the job, and you need to find a way that changes so your character comes to life. Also, as a quick side quest, mind your medium. If you're writing a screenplay but writing feelings in the action lines instead of articulating them in visible behaviour and lines of dialogue, a producer reading it is just going to be asking themselves, great, but how will this play visually? And for audio, the inverse is obviously true. The main point is to keep asking, why this person? And why this now? Keep forcing emotionally revealing choices packaged within your genre's bones. Clarify what your story costs your protagonist, psychologically and emotionally. Every genre has specific DNA elements that you need to include, and those also help you know which key areas to psychologically and emotionally mine. Ultimately, you want to make the concept act as a way to stress, test, and express the character rather than replace their character role. Reason 4 is your scenes are good, but they don't meaningfully escalate or intensify. Beautiful scenes that don't tighten choices or raise the pressure make a story feel safe. Your scenes are basically acting as puzzle pieces, and each one needs to drive our desire to get the next, while helping us also make sense of the big picture overall. Audiences remember information based on their perceived importance, so cut what isn't key or make sure to dial up the critical info so it's hard to miss, making sure pressure and momentum is pushing us on. If a detail matters, also make sure it's being earned. And if you can't or it isn't earning its place, maybe it's something to cut. Even great dialogue and emotional honesty won't save a scene that begins and ends in the same place. If it doesn't alter choices, knowledge, power, or stakes, your script is going to be treading water and readers' attention is going to drift. This has showed up in almost every private client script I've edited over the last year, from feature films through to TV pilots. In a National Treasure style movie, there were really smart scenes and some of the best world building I'd ever read, but the protagonist basically drifted between them, and therefore the stakes didn't rise and it became kind of a pleasant travelogue, something that I therefore battled to actually stay focused and invested in. Early drafts often let your characters unload their backstory because you're getting to know them, but that doesn't inform conflict, and if it doesn't inform conflict, if it's a page of backstory that won't inform a character decision later on, it's not story critical, it's probably trivia that we don't really need. So after every scene, I want you to interrogate it and ask yourself what is harder for the person in this than it was at the start. If the answer is nothing, cut, merge or re-engineer that scene so it either closes a door, raises a cost, opens a door, or escalates risk internally, externally, or ideally both. And remember that in dramatic writing, every win needs to come at a cost, because that's how you keep the trial and error cycle repeating while also escalating the story along. A story without any sense of escalation is basically just a treadmill. If I can look at your script and remove a scene without breaking your story, that scene has not earned its place. And reason number 5 is that your script is well written but lacks a distinct dramatic identity that's going to help it stand out and be marketable. A script can work plot-wise and still lack a dramatic identity. If we can't truly tell what it's about by the end, producers can't tell who it's for in the market and why it's going to resonate with anyone now. I see this the most in plot-heavy dramas where serving twists eclipses the emotional argument this thing is trying to make. Readers and producers of course admire your craft ability, but they won't feel invested if the core question, the thematic concern, is totally buried beneath and behind your clever sleights of hand. And even when a big twisty plot thing does sell, it sells because there's still a clear emotional engine underneath and a thematic concern it's exploring, not just cleverness. Something like Inception is a good example of this. So define your thematic promise, your emotional engine, and have your protagonist's arc, test and reveal it. Make your plot a pressure system designed to challenge a specific human dilemma. So ask, why this story now? Why this protagonist? What emotional or philosophical argument is being tested through this journey? So pick the script's owner so we know whose story this actually is. Force an urgent problem on them with stakes that feel like life or death to the character. Make the concept itself stress the character and lean into your genre's DNA, and make sure that every scene is escalating and changing in a way that tightens the dramatic screws. Make sure you're doing all of these in your scripts and you'll stop getting admired but ultimately ignored. Because the writing process itself creates blind spots as we go, if these traps show up, don't worry, that's totally normal. But if you want to really accelerate your writing and avoid other traps, then steal 13 years of my pro writing insights by watching this video next.